Hello and welcome to this video on more advanced options that are available with groups and toggles inside of TsGui. So first things first, I just wanted to mention, in case some of you are running in an older version, please make sure you've got at least 0.9.3.2 because there's a couple of bug fixes that make this much more consistent and reliable experience all around. So yeah, if you haven't got that version already, please go grab it from the website. It'll make everything much better. So at least 0.9.3.2. Right, so where we left off in the last video, we were looking at a very basic setup where you tick a box, you get an additional page that displayed a bunch of additional applications that the user can go and select. Now the first thing I wanted to cover is when you run the application up, and if you've got a bunch of inactive controls, because this box hasn't been ticked, for example, so those three options over there would be marked inactive if I untick this box. All the variables get assigned this TsGui underscore inactive value. Now the first thing I wanted to cover is a couple of ways that you can change that default. So the first thing we're going to try is setting it to a default value. So for example, you may have an instance where you've got that GUI option, and if it's enabled, you still want the default value to be set, even if the entire control is inactive. So what you can do in that instance is, if we look for inactive value in our examples, this option here, inactive value, will set a different value than TsGui underscore inactive. So for example, if we wanted our MS Office option, here it's set to checked, so that would give it a value of true. If we wanted that to also be the case if the whole thing is just inactive, then we can do this. Inactive value. So we set a new element in here, inactive value, set the value that you want, in this case true. And now when we run the GUI up, our app MS Office gets set to true, and the Visio project are still at TsGui inactive. So in that way you can still preset your defaults if you want to, or just have a completely separate value depending on whatever logic you want to build. But just be aware that option is there if you need it. Now the other option I wanted to mention is, say you wanted that to not get created at all. So if this option here is inactive, you don't even want to create this task sequence variable at all. So in that instance, the option you want to look for when you want to add it as an attribute up here is PurgeInactive equals true. And again, that will be in your examples as well. So if you want to copy and paste it, just to make sure, actually I'm going to do that just to make sure I don't make any typos. And let's get rid of that because it's now redundant. So now when we run our test, the app underscore MS Office task sequence variable is not even created at all. Now this can also be set at the parent level and have it inherit down. So you could, if you wanted to, take this out and put it at the page level. And now everything on that page is now gone. Now where this can get interesting is now you can potentially have two GUI options that set the same task sequence variable, and if you set them both to have PurgeInactive equals true, only the active control will actually try and create a task sequence variable. And we'll run through some scenarios in a minute and how that may actually look in practice. So just wanted to run through those two options before we get started, and as we get further on they'll become a bit more useful. So the first thing we want to run through in terms of multiple groups, which is kind of the main meat of this particular video. There's a couple of things to remember. The first thing is the general rules around what applies and what wins in any given scenario. So with for example, the hide option, if you've got a hidden parent element, i.e. if your page is a member of a group that's hidden, then that will inherit all the way down, and anything underneath that will also be hidden. Same thing at the column level, and everything under them will be hidden, therefore inactive. With groups, it's a little bit different. The way groups work is that if you have two groups assigned to an element, whether that be a page, a column, or a GUI option, if any of those groups is enabled, then that element will be enabled. If none of them are enabled, then if one group is hidden and one group is disabled, then the hidden rule will apply. So the control or the element will be hidden. And obviously if they're both, if multiple groups are all set the same, then that's a moot point. So let's have a look and see what this looks like in practice. So just to keep things nice and simple, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, let's make this into a single page so it's a bit easier to see. Let's make this a bit wider to allow for the new column that's just been put on this page. Let's put this group here, and let's create or add this column to two separate groups. So that's group apps 1, group apps 2. And let's create a second checkbox toggle. 1 and 2. 1, 2. 1 and 2. So now we have two checkboxes, one that will toggle group apps 1 and the other one will toggle group apps 2. And the column, the second column, that'll be off to the right, is a member of both of those groups. And obviously you can just add that. You can add as many groups as you like to any element in the same way, just one on top of the other. So now both of them are inactive, both of them are hidden. But as soon as we tick 1, everything comes alive. Even though this is inactive and set to hidden, because this is enabled, this will win. And same thing here. Now let's just tweak this a little bit, and let's only have group apps 1 to be hidden, and let's see what it looks like in that scenario. So again, as you can see, everything's hidden as soon as one's enabled. So you can see here that the hidden toggle is winning. But as soon as you enable one of them, everything comes to life. So I just wanted to make that very clear before we get too much further in. So as you can see, adding any element to multiple groups is pretty straightforward. All you actually have to do is, rather than having a single group, you just keep on adding them as you see fit. And as long as you take into account those rules that we've just run through as to which group elements will apply in any given state, and also take into account the inheritance rules. So if you were to add sub-controls or sub-GUI options to groups, just be aware that there may be groups above it that may override it. If you can remember all those rules, then it should all make sense. Now let's move on to drop-down lists, because this is where it starts getting a bit interesting. Now checkboxes are pretty straightforward. You're either on or off, and they're quite easy to understand as to what's going on with any group membership. When it comes to drop-down lists, you can actually start doing some interesting things. For example, you could say if you're in the sales department, then you can hide all of the additional application options that aren't relevant to the sales department. You could potentially say with Windows 10, say if you selected the latest build of Windows 10, that's actually was the 1607, not 1606, you may hide applications that you know aren't compatible with that department. I recently had a user who emailed me, and he had multiple customers in his drop-down list, and then he would assign or make available only certain OUs inside of their domain that were only relevant to that particular customer. So there's all these sorts of logics that you can start building in and make your GUI much more dynamic and only sort of presenting the correct sort of information to the user at any given time. So let's see how we would build this. Now when it comes to drop-down lists, there's two kind of approaches you can take here. The first looks pretty similar to how you set up a checkbox. In fact, it's basically identical. You come in to your drop-down list and you add the same toggle code or the same toggle XML that you put on a checkbox. And then you can have one or more values that will enable that toggle. And again, we're looking at the value, not the text. So say we wanted group apps 1 to be enabled. Let's get rid of that one for now. So say we want it to be enabled for the HR department and the project management office, so PMO. Now because we already have our new toggle created for group apps 1, I'm just going to get rid of that one there. Save that. So now our toggle for group apps 1 is now our drop-down list. Actually, we don't need that checkbox there at all. So let's just get rid of that. So now if we select additional apps 2, we have the same behavior we had before, but now also if we select HR or project management, again our options are available. And again our rules apply as before. So if any of these two enabled values get set within this GUI option, basically that group will be enabled and the appropriate controls or elements will then be displayed. So pretty straightforward. Now the other way we can approach this is that rather than creating a single toggle for the entire drop-down list, is we can actually create toggles on each individual option. So what we can effectively do is have a toggle for HR, toggle for IT, toggle for PMO, toggle for sales, and then we can have individual groups for each of those departments as well, and then just assign the groups to the relevant controls, the relevant GUI elements. So let's come into our config examples again, and you can see here in this drop-down list for department, we've got a very similar sort of setup where we have toggles just applied to the options. So let's just copy one of those. Now we don't have to set the enabled or disabled bits of XML in the scenarios, because if you set it at this level, it will assume that that is the value that you want to take as enabled. So let's make that group HR. And let's not hide them. Let's just do disabled, like that. And another one for sales. So now what we could potentially do is we've got separate logic for each of our departments. Therefore, we can have a checkbox to say, if you want to install additional applications, tick here. And then we can come down here. Let's remove this part from the overarching column and say that we know that MS Project is only going to be relevant for, say, obviously the project managers, so the PMO, and let's say IT. And let's save that. So now, when we run it up, oh, and I think I've forgotten the group apps part. I've gotten rid of one too many. So we need to add the column to the group apps group. Group apps 2 group actually now. Yes. And as you can see here, because this checkbox is no longer hidden, we've just got a disabled control or disabled set. If we tick the box, project is now still disabled. So we can't do anything with that unless we select IT or project management. So you can see how this could potentially change the way that you display information to your users and how you want that to look and feel. One thing you can potentially do, and why I wanted to bring up this PurgeInactive option, is that you may find that it just gets a little bit unwieldy to have all of these options getting added to appropriate groups in certain ways. So one option you could potentially consider is actually creating separate pages for each group. So if we set this to page, and then rather than using them per GUI option, set them at the page level. So let's say this is the one for the PMO. And let's ignore our checkbox option for now. Let's just base things on the departments that we select. So this page is for the PMO group. Now let's say we wanted one for sales, but we didn't want them to have our project install. But let's say they had an app, let's say Salesforce. Salesforce. And then let's say we had a similar thing for IT, but rather than Salesforce, they had the SCCM console. So SCCM console. So now we've got 3 different pages with only the apps on them that we want each group to see. What you'll notice though is that in all of them they have MS Office and and Visio available to them. So let's start this up and see what this does. So for a start, we can see we're getting every single page, which is not what we want. So obviously we need a hide option in there. So that's the first thing. And the second thing you'll notice is that you've got MS Office in here 3 times, and then MS Visio in here 3 times. So what it is effectively doing is every GUI option you create is going to try and create a task sequence variable, and it's effectively going to be a last write wins type scenario. So it's going to be at best inconsistent. So what you want to do in this scenario is we want to set our toggles to hide. So now we won't get each and every page showing up, which is not what we want. We only want to see the pages that are relevant for our group. And the other thing we want to do is we want to use that PurgeInactive option we came across earlier. PurgeInactive equals true. So what this is going to do is if this page is inactive, it's going to clean out all those other task sequence variables or those other GUI options out of our config so that we only get back the options that we want, or the ones that are relevant. So here we've got our, oh no, what have we done? Right, so it seems like I've made a quick typo in my config, so let's go back for a second. You can see here that we've still left our sales group assigned to our IT page. So let's quickly change that. Now we can see our sales page when we want sales. We've got our IT page, and we select IT. HR has nothing, so you just get a finish button, and PMO gets project. So let's select IT as an example. And now we're back to a simple single app MS Office and app MS Visio, and all the other ones have been chucked out. So that's where the PurgeInactive attribute can come in handy. It may actually end up simplifying your config depending on what you're actually trying to achieve. So that's it for this video. Hopefully that all made sense. If not, please give me some feedback. I'm always keen to hear feedback on the instructional videos, on any bug reports or any issues, feature requests, all that kind of stuff on the app. It's been very encouraging, so thanks very much for the people that have been writing in and letting me know what needs doing and what issues they've been coming across. So again, questions, issues, anything else, please let me know either via the 20road.com website or post below in the YouTube video. Thanks very much.